Good evening, everyone. Welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers update tonight, the 28th of January 2014. My name's Chris Nitzo, and on your screen here, I haven't had a chance to update it, but we are now in the final planning phase. So not the pre-planning phase. Our team is now in the final planning phase for a tropical cyclone chase, likely to be leaving tomorrow to wherever we need to get to. There may be a chance that we may not need to go anywhere, because at the moment we have a tough decision to make as a chase team as to whether we get into the center of the system. The center of the system is unlikely to see the strongest winds and the heaviest rain and the best weather, or the worst weather, depending on the way you look at it. So we might be faced with a tough decision to miss the core and get the worst of the weather, or to try and get the core and miss out on the worst of the weather. So pretty tough decision the chase team and I will have to make over the next 12 to 18 hours. Anyway, let's get into it for tonight. There's a lot of people interested in what this thing's going to do. A big thank you to everyone. Tonight on our social media we have just hit 80,000 followers on there, so that's gone up by about 10,000 in about 2.5 days. So that's an amazing amount of support that we've received in the last few days. We've been around for a while, but people are really starting to know about us now. So thank you very much for your support, and we look forward to bringing you more and more updates over the coming years. Issued at 5:50 p.m. today from the Bureau of Meteorology, we have an updated track map, and we can see that the system will move to the west overnight tonight pretty rapidly based on the movement tomorrow. Tomorrow's movement will be a lot slower. Now, tomorrow there is quite a large area of uncertainty in its movement. Now, we're going to talk about what factors might come into play with that, but just be aware that this track here, while it might be the best model guidance right now that the Bureau has, it may change quite significantly depending on some interactions between a couple of different systems out there. It's a bit complex tomorrow, particularly more so towards the end of tomorrow, the afternoon time frame. And really that will determine then if this system goes and hits more around the Cairns region, or whether the system continues to push in a more southerly direction and hit more closer to the Townsville to Tully area. So at this point in time, the models are starting to trend a little bit further to the south, so south of Innisfail, and particularly in the Tully to Ayr area is what we've seen in the most recent model guidance that has just come out since this update was issued. It is important to note that if the cyclone decides, or the low decides, to move in a more southerly direction, it will have a little bit of time left over the water, or a little bit more time left over the water, where it may intensify a little bit greater than what we're seeing here on the Bureau of Meteorology. So there is still a chance of this system becoming a Category 2. Some of the guidance, like the UK Met Office and the GFS guidance, are suggesting that that is a distinct possibility of a Category 2 tropical cyclone on landfall. Once again though, if it is, it's not going to be your classical cyclone. Look at this gale radius here. You can see the gales here extending a long way to the south of the system and almost non-existent to the north of the system. So it's a borderline call as to whether you'd even name it a tropical cyclone based on the Bureau of Meteorology's definition of what a cyclone is. So really folks, it's if you're south of this that you're going to cop the worst of the weather. If you're north of it, you're going to be spared a fair bit of nastiness or excitement, whichever way you look at it. Interestingly, later on in the forecast, if we look at what happens after landfall, we still have a very high degree of doubt here in the 3-day outlook as to how far west this system pushes and how far south this system pushes. There's a lot of different variable guidance here as to whether this goes into central Western Queensland, and I'm sure a lot of graziers are going, yes, please, please, please go there, or northwestern Queensland, where there's an equal amount of graziers going, yes, please come over there. So look, folks, at this stage we can't tell you. That's too far ahead, and it will depend on what happens tomorrow. We can't even tell you where it's going to hit land yet, so we're not going to be able to tell you how far and what part of the inland region it does actually hit or go into. Earlier today, the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre believed that this will become a tropical cyclone in the next 24 hours and is going to be located somewhere in this boxed region. So they're not really narrowing it down too much, but somewhere in that boxed region in the next 24 hours, the JTWC believed that a tropical cyclone may form. That may be a little ambitious, because we'll have a look at some of the current satellite imagery for the system, which doesn't look too favourable, but we'll talk a bit more about that now. Thanks to Weather Zone, you can start to see just the hint of some rotation out here on the Willis Island radar, way out here to the northeast or east-northeast of Cairns. That's where our tropical low is forming. If we look at what that looks like on satellite right now, we see that there's a lot of thunderstorms and they're all starting to take a little bit of shape here. Earlier today there was really no organisation whatsoever. Today at least we're starting to, or later today, we're starting to see just the hint of that rotational effect that comes with a developing tropical low. It's still an elongated system. That means the center of the system at the surface is a little like an oval shape instead of a tight circle shape. Now, that's important because in an oval shape, it's very difficult to create the spin or the vorticity and then to create the thunderstorms that develop around a central point that is required in a tropical cyclone. Now, so if I show you that, so this is a satellite-derived wind analysis, and what we can tell from these satellite-derived wind analysis is that the actual circulation center is very much like a racetrack type thing. So you can see here, this is what we mean by elongated. So it's not a circle shape, it's more of an oval shape, and that is difficult for the system to develop quickly if it remains in that oval shape. What we want to see it start to do is we want to start to see it form a tight circle here, and then we should see rapid intensification overnight. Now at this point in time, the model guidance suggests that that's not going to happen tonight. It might happen, more likely to happen, tomorrow night. Alright, so the first of our model analysis today will be the Access Regional Model. This is the Bureau of Meteorology's model for the Australian region. It only goes out to 3 days, but it does have a pretty good level of reliability. So if we look at it here, 5 p.m. today, 4 p.m. today, sorry, this is when the model was initialized, so it's got it right so far. If we look at what happens, we start to see little spots of gales all over the place here, but they're not really wrapping around the system tonight, so not expected to become a TC tonight. And if we look at the system developing here, we're starting to get gales a little bit closer to it as it pushes early tomorrow in a westerly direction. And you can start to see those gales now. They're still not quite wrapping around the system. So this system keeps it, or this model keeps it a tropical low and keeps it reasonably shallow, although it does tighten it up a little bit more than it has done in the past. There is certainly, by about Wednesday night, there is an argument there to name it a tropical cyclone because those gales do start to wrap a little closer to the actual center of the system. And then if we look towards Thursday morning, where we start to see landfall possible by around about lunchtime or just before lunchtime on Thursday, just to the north of Cairns, around the Port Douglas area, this is the most northerly outlying model. So that's why the likelihood that the Bureau's got Port Douglas still in the warning zone is because this model guidance is suggesting that it may cross as far north as that. But you can see here, this is the dilemma that we are as chasers facing. You can see here that all the really strong winds are going to be south of the system. The heavy rain will be south of the system. And really, if we went to try and attack the system's core, we're not going to cop too much. We need to be well south of the system. So anywhere sort of, in this particular modelling, Innisfail to Townsville would be the areas for us to remain in. But because they're likely to get the strongest winds, heaviest rain. You can see here, even after the system crosses, as we head towards Wednesday night, there's still gales hitting the coastline all the way, particularly in this Townsville to Ingham area. So there is a bit of a dilemma there as to, do we hit the core or do we get the best of the weather? So if we look at the rainfall associated with the system, you can see here these are rainfalls over 3 hours. So anything that might hit purple or even dark blue is extremely heavy. You can see that as the system crosses to the Cairns region, all the really heavy stuff is located between Innisfail and about Bowen. And so really that's where the heavy rain is, well south of the actual core. You can see that the system crosses the coast as a 990 or 989 hectopascal tropical cyclone. So that's around about a high end or mid to high end category 1 system. And you can see here that the rainfall spreads inland, although not as heavy as it is on the coast. That rainfall spreads a long way inland. Once again, have a look towards the end of this animation to see exactly where that rain spreads inland. Alright folks, so let's have a look at this system now at some higher resolution imagery from the European global model. And the European showing that by tonight, Tuesday night, we see this very elongated low pressure system, and that's exactly what we're seeing right now. So the model has verified very, very well so far. As we head towards Wednesday morning, we see that the system starts to tighten up overnight tonight, and we start to see these gale force winds located to the north and south of the system. And we see these gales really hitting the coast tomorrow by about lunchtime or the afternoon period tomorrow. The heaviest of the strongest of the winds, I should say, are located somewhere between about Cairns and Ingham. And there's a lot of gales offshore as well. So those gales also hitting the islands here, the Whitsunday Islands, and also the Bowen region as well, which is pretty exposed when the cyclone's there. As we head to 7 p.m. tomorrow night, we see those gales intensifying with the system as it tracks in a southwesterly direction, and we see some really, really strong winds developing around the Innisfail area tomorrow night and into Thursday morning. And those really strong winds then push a little bit further to the south and start to affect the offshore region around Townsville and all the way through to Lucinda. As we continue through the animation on Thursday, we continue to see gales really smashing the coast here, just relentlessly for a large or a long period of time. As the system tracks towards the west-southwest Thursday afternoon, it makes landfall around about 4 p.m. according to this model, and we continue to see just gales relentless, folks, for 24 hours plus here on the coastline, anywhere south or north of about Serena, just continuously copying gale force winds, and they're onshore, so that's going to drive water levels up, and we'll talk about tides right at the end of tonight's broadcast. But at this point in time, this particular guidance from the Europeans suggests that this system will cross as a Category 1 tropical cyclone. So looking at the rainfall from 4 a.m. to 4 p.m. along the tropical coastline, you can start to see some heavier rain developing here. These purple shadings are rainfalls of 10 to 25 millimeters. The lighter purple, 25 to 50, and then the orange is 50 to 100 millimeters. So this is between 4 a.m. and 4 p.m. tomorrow. You can start to see some of that rain starting to impinge on the coastline. Some lighter falls on the Herbert Lower Burdekin coastline, lighter falls north of Cairns, but some heavier rainfalls starting to develop on those exposed coastlines. Now that shifts and changes fairly dramatically as we head towards 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. on Thursday. So 4 p.m. Wednesday to 4 a.m. Thursday, we start to see some very heavy rainfall developing on the wet tropics coastline, extending to the Herbert and Lower Burdekin, and also extending to parts of the central coast. And with Sundays, we start to see that really heavy rainfall as the low makes its approach to the coastline. Then as we head towards the next stage, which is the 4 a.m. Thursday to 4 p.m. Thursday, we see very heavy rain here just to the southwest of the low-level circulation centre. We see some very heavy rain on the Herbert Lower Burdekin coastline, and very heavy rain also in the northern parts of the central coast with Sunday's area. So we are starting to see some extreme rainfall there, starting to get into the 150 to 200 millimetre range over the last 36 hours in some of these regions. So that we're going to start to see some flooding threat as we head into around about lunchtime Thursday. Once the system crosses the coast around about that Cassowary Coast region, Cardwell, Tully, Ingham, Innisfail, that area. So anywhere south of that, particularly once the system crosses the coast, we're going to see some extreme rainfall. You can see here right around, now this is important because this is right around the time of another high tide that night, and so this area around Townsville copying some extreme rainfall there at that point in time, 50 to 100 millimetres over 6 hours, and also the central coast with Sundays in a feeder band here receiving some very heavy rainfall at the time as well. Also, that rainfall extending a long way west, even into the tablelands, so we could be seeing some very heavy rain into the tablelands as well around about that time once the system is right on the coastline. As we head into Friday morning, we start to see that rain easing as the low pressure system now moves inland, but we still have some moderate to heavy falls right on the coastline here, anywhere south of about Ingham. We continue to see moderate to heavy falls all the way south to even possibly as far south as Rocky, believe it or not, starting to get into a possible feeder band here on this system. Rain is light to moderate to the north of the low, and there's also some moderate to heavy falls just to the west of the low. You can see also inland Queensland starting to get a little bit of rainfall from this, although it does become a little bit patchy as we head into the central inland part. And And then finally, as we head towards Friday night and Saturday, the focus of the rain heads off to the Mackay region, who are caught under this never-ending feeder band, which is just pumping in 50 plus millimetres in this area over the 12-hour period on Friday night and Saturday morning. And it just continues to pump in moisture from the Coral Sea. Nice, warm, moist air advection here along the coastline, being uplifted as well due to convergence. So we're going to see some very heavy rainfall in that area. Also some very heavy rain to the south and southwest of the low, and some lighter falls out here to the north, starting to clear up around the Cairns coastline with just some isolated showers. But even the Herbert and Lower Burdekin starting to see an easing of that heavy rain on the Saturday or Friday night into Saturday. If we take a look at an in-depth look at the GFS model, we can see these gales not quite making it to the coast here on the GFS. As we head towards Wednesday morning, we see that load starts to tighten up here into a recognised circulation, and that low then starts to intensify as we head to Wednesday afternoon. And by Wednesday afternoon, the GFS model develops a tropical cyclone, and in fact the GFS model goes a little bit further with that and actually deepens it into potentially a borderline Category 2 system as it approaches the coastline. The GFS also approaches the coastline a lot further to the south. You can see this red colouring here is destructive winds here, not just damaging winds, destructive winds possible with the system as it heads on Thursday afternoon. We continue to see here it tracks in a more south-southwest to southwest direction before finally deciding to make landfall in and around the Townsville to Ayr coastline. Now bear in mind that that is significant change from the GFS, because the GFS has been hinting more at around a Cairns crossing, so it'll be interesting. This isn't the only model suggesting this. It is interesting now to see that there's a trend here between the GFS and also, I'll show you now, the UK Met. So tomorrow morning the UK Met model has a system well off the Cooktown to Cairns coastline, and we see how it tracks from there. It remains fairly slow moving as we head to Wednesday afternoon, but by Wednesday night it starts to intensify to a 995 to 990 hectopascal tropical cyclone, and we start to see the system track in a west to west southwest direction, but from further offshore. And so we see here that the system is now tracking towards the coastline and is actually intensifying to a slightly more intense system than the Euro is showing, more in turn of what the GFS is showing, which is a Category 2 or very, very high-end Category 1 on landfall just to the north of Townsville. It also keeps the landfall a little later than the other model guidance, suggesting that landfall occurs more than likely on the Friday and possibly even as late as Friday afternoon around the Townsville or just north of Townsville region as a fairly strong system, which means in UK Met model terms, a strong system would be a Category 1 or 2 tropical cyclone, more likely to be around the Category 2 range. So if we look at the GFS ensemble, overall the GFS ensemble believes that we're going to be looking at a Friday morning landfall right on the Townsville coastline. However, we are looking at also a potential error margin here ranging as far south as Prossie and as far north as Cairns. So it does justify the Bureau extending the warning that far south to Prossie and also that far north to Port Douglas, because the GFS is still showing us a fairly wide error margin here of A, the crossing time between Thursday to Friday, and B, the crossing location. If we look at the European, there is much tighter agreement in the European, suggesting a landfall anywhere from about Townsville through to just south of Cairns is what the European is suggesting. And the error margin in the European is nowhere near as large, the error margin being located just in this area here. So not really looking at it hitting anywhere south of about Ayr or Home Hill, and not really looking at it hitting anywhere north of about Cairns. So the error margin here is quite good now. The model is starting to tighten up. It is starting to be more reliable now in terms of starting to look at that final crossing point. So here's the key time frame, folks. Now we're looking at around about 5 kilometres up in the atmosphere, and we're looking at tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. Queensland time, and we're looking here on the bottom right of our screen. We're looking at what we call an upper level trough. This upper level trough is pushing northwestwards, and it's going to try to capture the tropical cyclone and try to push it in a south to southeast direction. However, Also, we have, trying to stop that from happening, a fairly strong mid-level high located here. You can see here Sydney, so you can see that the mid-level high is centered over southeastern Australia. Now, the high is going to try to push the system westwards. The trough is trying and push the system south to southeastwards, and together they're going to battle it out for a little period here, where this system, where this upper level trough will try to amplify and capture it. And let's have a look at what happens as we head to 4 p.m. tomorrow. You can see that by 4 p.m. tomorrow, that upper level trough is just managing to get the edge of its tentacles on this tropical cyclone. Now, if it does that, and if it manages to do that, it will start to drift it in a more south to southeast direction for a very small period, because that upper level trough does not remain amplified for very long. What we end up getting is this ridge that comes back, and it's almost like a bit of a battle. The trough tries to say, come over here, and the ridge says, nah, get out of the way, and gets back in control of the system. So there's only a few hours there where the trough takes control of the system, and those few hours start from around about 10 a.m. tomorrow and continue through to about 7 p.m. tomorrow night, and before this ridge re-establishes itself underneath the system and tracks it back to the west. Now, how far south it can move tomorrow afternoon and evening will determine exactly where it's going to cross, and that's what we're finding difficult at the moment, is just to see exactly how long it takes before the ridge retakes control of this tropical cyclone after the trough tries to get its tentacles onto it. It's just part of the fascination with tropical cyclones. That's why they're so difficult to predict. They don't do what they want. What they do is what the physics around them suggests they should be doing. And what's difficult to forecast is what that physics, what the fluid dynamics in the atmosphere will be like at a particular moment in time. That's what we find difficult. That's why they're so difficult to forecast. It's not because they have a mind of their own, and it's not because they do whatever they want. That's not the case. So we're going to look at some tide times now, folks, because this is all important. There's a big high tide here in Lucinda of 3.94 metres, 8:45 a.m. on Thursday, so we don't want this system crossing any time around Thursday morning. There's also a lower high tide mark at 8:40 p.m, so we don't want it crossing at around about 8 or 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. around the Lucinda area. And then the next day, Friday, we actually see an even higher tide at 3.96 metres around that 9:30 a.m. mark, and a reasonable tide there at 3.2 at 9:26. So there you go, about 9 o'clock in Lucinda. We don't want it crossing Thursday morning or Thursday night, Friday morning or Friday night around that 9 o'clock, because you can add about a metre to those tides in an onshore gale force stream. If we look at tide times in Townsville, very similar tide times in Townsville. Looking at Thursday morning, 8:40 a.m, a high tide of 4.09. At 8:35, another fairly highish tide of 3.37. On the Friday morning, 9:21 a.m, 4.12 metres. That's a pretty massive tide for Townsville. And also Friday night at 9:22, we got a 3.36 metre tide. So remember, we would be looking at approximately, assuming that we're seeing a Category 1 cyclone, we would be looking at onshore winds driving it up to about a metre higher than those tides. So you need to be prepared for a situation where you could be looking at the highest levels of the water well above the highest tides of the year. Once again, it all depends on when the system crosses. We just don't know that yet. If we look at the tide times for Bowen, very similar tides again, 9:30, 3.66, on Friday, 10 o'clock, 3.65. So they're the key moments. Really, it's the morning high tide, folks, that we're worried about. We don't want it crossing Thursday morning. Looks like it won't do that. We don't want it crossing Friday morning. That's probably a bigger issue, because some of the guidance is suggesting a landfall early on Friday. It's a matter of exactly when that happens. You can see here, if it crosses at low tide, we got no issue. The low tides are extremely low, but if it crosses at high tide, we will have quite an issue. Shute Harbour or Airlie Beach, same thing again, around about 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on both of those days. We have a fairly high tide again, 4.28, 4.29 metres. Once again, very high tides, some of the highest of the year coming up for these regions. So as I say, folks, 9 o'clock is not the time we want this thing to cross. We don't want it to cross within a couple of hours of that time frame. We'd like it to cross either very early in the morning or after about lunchtime on both Thursday and Friday, because if it crosses around about these times, we're going to see those tide levels significantly higher than they should be. Thanks heaps for watching this update, everyone, and we look forward to talking to you again tomorrow night, hopefully from the road. We should be on the road tomorrow night somewhere, unless we decide that it is smarter for us to stay in our home city. We might decide that it might be smarter for us to stay in our home city to experience the worst or the best of the weather conditions. So, we look forward to talking to you tomorrow night. Keep up to date with our social media. We have apps. We have an app on sale for $1.99 if you'd like to. If you don't have Facebook, but you'd still like to keep up to date with all the latest information we post, please look at that one. We also have on our Chase page, once we actually get going and get into the car and start traveling wherever we need to travel to, we will be streaming live. And probably not tomorrow, but definitely on Thursday, we will be streaming live, and we will be chatting to you while we're on the road as well. So if you'd like to keep track on what we're doing, we'll also be posting live observations or nearly live observations here from the ground. So in terms of wind speeds, central pressures, barometric pressures, I should say. So all the meteorological data will be posted on this page as well. It won't be posted on our Facebook because that'll be too many updates for everyone. So this is our current Chase page. So if you go to our website, cyclonechasers.com.au, and you go into this link here, which is called Current Chase, and you'll have all the latest details should we decide to go on a chase tomorrow. Thanks very much for watching tonight, and once again, we look forward to talking to you tomorrow. Good night.